Saturday morning, time for the Experts program on Power Talk Radio, 1460 and 101 FM. And that means Luis Alvarez is going to help us kick things off this morning. Good morning, Luis.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Just a couple weeks away from the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Yes. It's a little later this year than previous years. Actually, the first time ever that it's not on the third weekend. And that's because we have the IndyCar races coming in that weekend. And they're kind of sucking the air out of the room in terms of places to stay and things like that. So we decided to move it out a week to help our patrons that come to the Jazz Festival not be convenienced.
Right. And just to be clear to everybody, the IndyCar races will be at Laguna Seca, not at the Monterey County Fairgrounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't want to get the neighbors startled over there.
Yeah. Good point, my friend. Good point.
Yeah. Any new technology that you're going to have on hand at the fairgrounds this year?
Well, we'll have the smartphone app that was brought back last year. It'll be there again this year. Everybody seems to really enjoy that. And it's a great way for folks to actually, even if you're not attending, you can download the app and look at the acts. And there's links to their YouTube pages and music pages. So you can hear a little bit of what those performers will be doing on the stage at the Jazz Festival. So that's a lot of fun. Of course, we're always improving our streaming and improving some of the other things that we do, but no major significant things going on right now.
Hey, Uber costs could rise by 20%. I guess Lyft as well if drivers become employees. And we've got a story to talk about here today. A California bill that appears to be on the verge of becoming law could upend the business model of Uber and Lyft and other unrelated businesses, trying to force them to hire drivers as full-time employees instead of contractors. What's going on here, Luis?
Well, California, being California, always is looking out for the rights of the employees. And sometimes they go a little bit too far. And this is one of those cases, personally, I believe. So there's an assembly bill called AB 5 that would require gig economy workers to be reclassified from contractors to employees. And as most people know, the gig economy has become a huge part of not just California's economy, but the world's economy. People that work when they want to work, for whom they want to work. They can work for, multiple people. So, for example, it's not unusual for you to be picked up by an Uber that also has a Lyft sticker on the window, because they can work for both and decide which one's better for them at that point in time. And those gig economy workers are always classified as contractors because they have the ability to decide when they want to work and how frequently they want to work. Well, California says, not so fast. The way we see it is because of the amount of control that these gig economy companies like Uber, Lyft, Grubhub, there's dozens of them that exist on these contractors. And they're saying because of the way that the contractors are treated, they're really more like employees than they are contractors. And therefore, they should be entitled to all the benefits of being employees, like all healthcare, all the things that large companies have to provide for their employees, workers' comp, and all those sorts of things. And obviously, if that happens and passes the Senate and Governor Newsom signs it, and it's going to have a significant impact on costs, operating costs for these companies. And of course, they're just going to pass it on to the consumer.
And it could also mean that for a number of businesses, I saw an article, just a mention about this in The Buzz, which is an online column that the Monterey County Weekly has. The editor was pointing out was that newspapers like the Monterey County Weekly, the Carmel Pinecone, the Monterey Herald, the Californian, they rely on independent contractors to deliver their papers, to distribute them around the area to either subscribers or, in the case of the free ones, to the various news boxes where you pick them up around the peninsula. And they're saying if they have to reclassify these contract employees who use their own vehicles and take this stuff around, if they have to reclassify them as regular employees, the newspapers are out of business. They will not be able to afford it, and you won't see those papers anymore.
Exactly. And I think that although the intent, as always, is a good one, right? Nobody wants to see workers be taken advantage of by employers, but this isn't the case like with Microsoft several years ago. That was the most famous case up in Washington State, where they had essentially full-time employees, people that worked 8 to 5, Monday through Friday for Microsoft, that were classified as contractors. So Microsoft could avoid paying all the extra overhead that they would have. And those workers had very little say in their working conditions and things like that. And that was a legitimate action on the part of the state government to crack down on Microsoft and say, no, these are employees. They're exactly like that. They're doing the exact same job as the person in the desk next to them is. So you can't really treat them differently. But this isn't the case. One of the downsides to this, for example, is, like I mentioned, a guy could work for Uber as well as Lyft at the same time and decide, you know what, Lyft is offering better rates right now, so let me switch off my Uber app and turn on my Lyft app. Well, if he's an employee or she's an employee of Uber, then Uber can dictate, no, you have to, you are not allowed to work for anybody else.
Right.
And that could severely impact a lot of these drivers who do Uber or Lyft as a second job when they want to, as frequently as they want to. I've talked to, I'm sure you have too, many of these drivers, and they'll tell you they have full-time jobs. And they do this either because they kind of enjoy getting out and talking to people, or they need the money. But regardless, becoming an employee of the rideshare company might be something that will impact them negatively more than positively. And it definitely will cause those companies, if this law goes forward and their protests against it aren't successful, it may cause some of those to go out of business, at least in California, and say, you know what, it's a market we don't want to play in. And that would personally ruin my life because I depend a lot on Uber and Lyft to get around. They're much convenient than cabs, and they're much more responsive, and I just find them a better experience overall. Yeah. And it would be a real blow, I think, to a lot of people who have become dependent on these kind of rideshare companies to get around.
I have a friend who drives for both Uber and Lyft. She only does it part-time, just a few days a week, and for her, it's like about another $700 to $800 a month. It isn't her main income. It's just what she does to make a few extra bucks. This is the kind of person that is going to be severely damaged by this rulemaking, and if this does end up becoming law.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen is once this law passes, because it does look like, regardless of what you and I are talking about, that the state legislature is hell-bent on getting this passed. Once it passes, and these companies will just basically say, you know what, that doesn't apply to us, and tell the government, go ahead and sue us. And so this is going to end up in litigation for years resolved. And in the meantime, it's just going to put a pause on a lot of these companies that have built themselves up based on this gig economy concept of workers wanting to work for them when they need them, and then not when they don't want to work. It's going to create a real negative impact in California, if not the nation. Because, a lot of times as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. So if it passes here, you can see it, passing in other more liberal states like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, places like that.
Well, I can see it being challenged in court by not only the companies, obviously Uber and Lyft would definitely go to court on this, and other companies that use independent contractors. I can see individuals challenging this as a violation to their right to free association.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good point.
And if it gets to the United States Supreme Court with the current makeup of this court, they may well invalidate this rule and say that this violates an individual's right to free association. The court has upheld some restrictions on free association. For example, you cannot use a claim to a right of free association to discriminate against people based upon their religion, their ethnicity, their race. But in something like this, where you're deciding whether or not someone's going to dictate basically the terms of how you are going to work as an individual for another individual or a company, the state of California may well have run into a buzzsaw here, and this could end up getting thrown out. I hope it does. If it's passed into law and signed by the governor, I hope it does get challenged and get thrown out, because the ramifications of this across the board are just going to be, I don't think they even realize how important the gig economy is to California and how important it is to people who are, let's just make no bones about it. The folks who work in the gig economy are towards the lower end of the income scale in this state, and it's already hard enough for them to make it here in California. And now what do you want to do? You want to take, like I said, my friend who makes about $800 a month, you want to take less than $10,000 a year away from these families, and that's an important amount of money to them. You want to really do that? This is not going to be a good situation.
No, and like I said, it will definitely be a pall over any future gig economy related startups that are out there in the wings looking to become the next Uber, the next Lyft, the next Grubhub. They're just going to be saying, you know what, until this gets decided, we really can't move forward because our business model might not be viable by the time we get to the point where we can go public. So it's typical government interference with technology that they don't understand, right? So they don't get the value of these kind of gig economy companies. And so therefore, they're going to treat them like they would treat a GM or company, with employees. companies. It's not the same thing.
No, you're right about that. As far as it goes, political comment here, because that's my stock and trade. But I'll just say this. Maybe this is going to be a wake-up call to some of these tech companies in Silicon Valley who, a lot of them are political progressives, but at the same time, they're also business people. I'm not expecting that they're going to change sides, but maybe they might be interested in supporting candidates on the other side of the aisle so we can get some balance in Sacramento, so that we can get rid of this one-party rule where you basically have one party running roughshod over the legislative process, which whatever half-baked ideas they come up with always ending up being law. And I blame a lot of this for happening the way it's happened because of the fact we've ended up with a one-party state in California, and there's no pushback. There's not enough pushback or balance in the legislative halls in Sacramento. And that's why this kind of stuff continues to happen.
Yeah, as you and I have talked about in the past, it's tough enough to run a business in California, and it just seems like every year they add another layer of complexity.
They just double down.
And do I think people are going to flee California like some of the people on the right say? No, I think there's a lot more going for California than just the bad government. But I do think it will definitely impact, and it's already impacting, where companies have decided to do business.
Right.
Have options. Cisco isn't moving out of California anytime soon. Neither is Apple or Uber, but they're going to add 10,000 more employees. They may decide to do it someplace else.
Exactly. Anyway, the reality is, as you mentioned earlier, there are always good intentions that people in Sacramento have, but unfortunately, there's something called unintended consequences. And we're going to have to see where all this goes. At some point, I hope cooler heads will prevail and some of these things can be renegotiated. There's also the possibility, Lewis, that we could see a voter pushback on something like this, and you might see an initiative on a future ballot that would repeal this independent contractor rule.
And Uber is, in fact, said that should this law get signed by the governor, that they will, along with many other gig economy companies, fund an effort to overturn it using a voter initiative. So even once it's signed into law, it's not going to be the final word.
All right.
By launch.
Luis Alvarez has been our guest today. He's the CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group. Online, it's alvareztg.com. At AlvarezTG is the Twitter handle. And Luis, the toll-free number for the I-Team.
Give us a call at 866-78-I-Team. That's 866-784-8326.